During our prelude, you're invited to come and silently light a candle to represent a joy, sorrow, or concern. Later in the service, we will have the opportunity to share briefly the stories represented by our candles. Please join me in the chalice lighting that's written in your order of service. And of course, read this section that's in bold. To face the world's darkness,
we light a chalice of light.
To face the world's coldness,
We light a chalice of warmth.
to face the world's terrors,
We light a chalice of courage.
to face the world's turmoil.
We light a chalice of peace.
May the glow of our chalice
Fill our spirits, our hearts, and our lives.
Whatever the need that brings you to this special place and hour, know most surely that it's best served through eager receptivity of mind and heart. If it be to take a firmer step toward the lifting horizon of high thought, if it be a desire to give assistance to feelings that should range and are true, if it be to challenge the way of your life, if it be to find your place as part of a caring and serving community, then let your mind consider well what is here thoughtfully given. Then let your heart accept freely what is here lovingly shared. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Greater Canton. We're an open community whose mission can be described by these words: care, respect, grow. We're partnered with the Unitarian Universalist Association and affirm its principles and purposes. As an open community, we welcome people of all faiths and spiritual paths into worship with us. The 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism are printed on the back of your order of service. I encourage you to become familiar with the principles and purposes of the UUA and to join us in seeking to fulfill your own mission. This morning, we're fortunate to have with us Rod and Mary Thompson. Rod they both have been with us for several Sundays, but just to give you a quick background as a reminder, Rod grew up in Canton along with his sister, who's here with us today. So welcome, and we're glad to have you here. They attended a Methodist church where their parents and both sets of grandparents were deeply involved in the life and activities of the church that felt like an extended family. He graduated from Hiram College, then taught American history and sociology for a year at Glenwood High School when it was the high school around here. He was called to ministry and earned the Master of Divinity at Lexington Theological Seminary in Kentucky in the last century in 1968, and he was ordained in the Disciples of Christ tradition. He served Christian churches in the Panama Canal Zone in Indiana. Then he experienced theological concerns about his faith and left the ministry. In retrospect, he was moving towards a humanist perspective. He found work in radio time sales, sports play-by-play, and eventually station management, which is why I think he'll be quite comfortable involved in the media with the recording of this service today. He discovered his faith home in a UU church. Soon they moved to the greater Columbus area and attended a UU church there, then Akron and Kent, and even worked at WKSU, the Center of All Knowledge. In 1980,
My room is the center of all.
In 1985, he became a UU minister and served congregations in Kent, Georgia, Maryland, and he was here in Ohio as our district executive. Then he decided to serve as interim minister. He's accredited, and he's served congregations in North Carolina, Minnesota, Toledo, Pittsburgh, and New Mexico. As time permits, he's a model mail road. What do you do? A model railroader and a ham radio operator, and he's a folk musician along with Mary. And he plays the washtub bass, and she plays a variety of instruments also, including the harp. So we're glad to have you and you here with you and extended family. So that's grand. So come, let us worship together. Let's join together in reading the covenant, which is on the wall and also in your bulletin.
Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one
These opening
another.
words are adapted from my colleague Patrick O'Neill. Here's to epiphanies, great and small, whenever they occur. A blessing on all wise women and men, east and west. Here's to the stargazers and pilgrims everywhere, who still foolishly enough and brave enough follow their stars, who travel by night, who bestow their uncommon gifts on us all. Welcome to this celebration of life and epiphanies, great and small. I know that it was January 6th on the calendar of Christendom. January 6th was Epiphany. So I know we're late, but I like the idea of epiphanies. I hope you'll go with, well, you almost have to go with the flow since we've rearranged so many things. According to the story, Epiphany marks the arrival of the Magi at the manger in Bethlehem to a period of quiet for reflection, repose, meditation, and prayer. And I offer this prayer adapted from my colleague, the Reverend Bruce Southworth. O creative spirit of life, we give thanks for the wonders that are. The human quest for meaning, for the poetry and myth of human imagination, for the bright stars in the night, for the joyful sound of voices lifted in song, for the good company of women and men in houses of fellowship, such as ours. We would be mindful also of the pain within the world, the loneliness, the hunger, the poverty which remains. We join in the faith that in the midst of all which besets us, we are called to be faithful to life and faithful to each other. The spirit of Epiphany is a spirit of hope and faith in the amazing possibilities which are open to us. Let us nurture this hope and this faith and proclaim it to the world. With the sounds of our community all around us, then, let us enter into the silence. As I said earlier, on the calendar of Christendom, January 6th is the Feast of Epiphany. According to the story, Epiphany marks the arrival of the Magi at the manger in Bethlehem, and it is therefore identified in Christian history as the first time Jesus' divinity was recognized by the Gentiles. It is, on the Christian calendar, the end of Christmas time. And from now until Ash Wednesday, which is February 10th this year, the focus is on Epiphany. So in some ways, we're not really late. According to the legend, it is also the beginning of the tradition of giving Christmas gifts. As with all ancient religions' origin stories, there had to be a remarkable birth, and both the highborn and the lowborn had to come and pay tribute. This is the one in our heritage. There has been a lot of speculation about these wise men or magi. Who were they? Where were they from? Why were they watching the stars? How did they figure out what it meant? Why did they go to Jerusalem? We don't know where they were from. The biblical account says they came from the east. But the assumption is that they were Zoroastrians from Persia, which is to the west. And we don't even know how many of them there were. We sing about 3 kings, but I think that's because of the 3 symbolic gifts. I'm reminded of what Margaret Gooding wrote about the star that guided these magi. First, she said she believed in the biblical story of the star until she grew up and began focusing on science and the rational, and so she came to understand that the star might have been a supernova, as recorded in the annals of history. But understanding the star scientifically didn't mean completely giving up the magic of the biblical story of the star. Here is what she wrote after that conclusion. I found I was unwilling to give up the star. It seemed a fitting symbol for the birth of one whose uncommon life has been remembered long. The star explained became the star understood for Jesus, for Buddha, for Zoroaster. Why not a star? Some bright star shines somewhere in the heavens each time a child is born. And who knows what it may foretell? For who knows what uncommon life may yet unfold if we but give it a chance. The Epiphany marks the end of the celebration of Christmas, which seems to me to have 3 basic themes: the Incarnation, peace and love, and the Epiphany. The Incarnation, the coming of the divine into human form. For the traditional Christian, the Incarnation means that Jesus was God. For liberal Christians and other Unitarian Universalists, the Incarnation reminds us that there is a divine spark in us all. Second, peace and love. That was both the angels and Jesus' message, that love can overcome fear, and that peace comes by being a neighbor to one another. For the traditional Christian, this means that God's message was that there should be peace and love on earth. For liberal Christians and other Unitarian Universalists, this is a reminder that we are the ones to do the work to make peace and love happen. Which brings us to number 3, Epiphany. This morning I want to examine more closely what Epiphany is all about for us. The early Christian church appropriated the name Epiphany from the Greeks and gave it a particular definition. So I want to look behind the particular and go to the more general, the more universal meaning of Epiphany. Epiphany is, of course, the English version of the Greek epiphaneia. The original word means manifestation, striking appearance, and any event in which the gods and or goddesses reveal their divine nature to human beings. No wonder the early church appropriated the word. More generally, Epiphany refers to any event or experience through which one gets a new or deeper insight into the nature of reality, or even ultimate reality. I feel sure that all of us have probably had numerous epiphanies in our lives, moments when revelations of an innermost nature or reality seemed to break in upon us. And we had the impulse to respond with, "Oh, now I see," or even, "Aha." Or as in the story of Archimedes, who was trying to figure out how to determine whether or not the king's crown was made of pure gold or not, one day, while slipping into the bathtub, had an epiphany of how he could do it and shouted, "Eureka, I found it." It's also said that he ran down the street naked in his great enthusiasm. This was a revelation of the nature of reality that had suddenly come upon him. This all happens in many places, in many times, in many ways. You might be reading a book, listening to a speaker, possibly me, walking on the beach, standing on a mountaintop, attending a concert or a play. Some flash of insight, maybe even the meaning of something you have heard or seen over and over again, but then all in a moment, it's crystal clear. What was blurry and of uncertain outline suddenly snaps into focus. Maybe you remember things like that in your life. I remember the day that suddenly I finally understood what fractions were about. I had been studying at home, trying to catch up after I, then my brother, then my sister Sue, had the chicken pox, which is 2 weeks each. In those days, we had to be quarantined, so I had to stay home, recovering for a total of 6 weeks. Those were the 6 weeks when my 4th grade class was first learning about fractions. But all of a sudden, before I returned to school, I understood fractions. I'm not sure I do anymore, but I did then. You've had similar ahas too, I'm sure. Maybe it was the day you began to understand what jazz is all about, or rock, or abstract art, or even human behavior, your own or someone else's. Or perhaps it was even the secret of life itself, as it was with the Buddha. Having been perplexed, troubled, and deeply concerned about the illness and poverty and death he had seen for the first time, wondering what this was all about and how one might address these concerns. After years of wondering and trying various paths, one day, so the story goes, sitting under a bow tree, the secret of it all suddenly came to Gautama, the Buddha. He had his epiphany. Maybe you've had that kind of an experience of looking at one of those abstract visual puzzles, all lines and colors, when everyone else seems to be seeing something in that puzzle. And you don't see it at all. All you see are the lines and the colors, and everyone said, no, you're not quite seeing it as it really is. Then suddenly, in a flash, you see what other people have been seeing. It's a small epiphany. Some epiphanies, however, are far more subtle, and they come and go like a will-o'-the-wisp, and you almost feel as though you have to clutch them quickly before they disappear. They come and go in an instant. The feeling generated by an epiphany is usually quite startling and moving. There's an excitement about it. I remember fractions that way. My, what a wonderful day that was in my young life. I could really somehow understand what fractions were all about. I decided right then and there on a life as a mathematician. Well, some epiphanies don't a career make. When that acute phase of an epiphany, however startling, however moving, when that active stage passes, then you may move into a longer feeling of warmth, or elation, or well-being, and of gratitude. You may know these things as you listen to a piece of music or get caught up in some powerful emotion being witness to a birth or a wedding or even a death. One is caught up in the sense of the depth and mystery and profundity of life. It's an epiphany, a glimpse of something of deep importance and value. And the curtain is parted, perhaps only momentarily. And we see something right into the heart of being. For many, that heart of being, that ultimate reality, is God. Walt Whitman wrote about that in his Psalm of Myself. Why should I wish to see God better than I do this day? I see something of God each hour of the 24 and each moment. Then in the faces of men and women, I see God. And in my own face in the glass. I find letters from God dropped in the street, and everyone is signed by God's name, and I leave them there, where they are. For I know that wheresoever I go, others will punctually come forever and ever. Others of us, rather than naming it God, will call it an insight, a reality based on our own experience and openness. I know you've had moments like that, epiphanies of our own, and of course, we try to make that possible every week, every Sunday. We gather in hope and expectation that perhaps some of our epiphanies will come our way, some new epiphany in all of its vibrancy and ecstasy, and we will be energized and inspired. By the way, the word inspired is an interesting word too. It means to breathe into. And that says something about the epiphany experience. You feel as though something has been breathed into you that energizes and uplifts you. And at the very least, if not a new epiphany, at least it reminds you of a previous one. So we tried again and again to generate a sense of the thread of the sacred, which is woven into the everyday fabric of life. Epiphanies. An epiphany is both a common and an uncommon human experience. Most religions cluster around particular epiphanies, particular revelations, and they are intended not so much on you having your own revelation or your own epiphany as on your embracing what had been someone else's revelation or epiphany. I am reminded of the story of the emperor's new clothes, which I know you all know. You remember the story about the magic suit of clothes that the charlatan tailors sold to the emperor the suit of clothes was so magical that you couldn't see them unless you were wise. And no one wanted to appear unwise. And so everyone pretended to see the magical suit of clothes until one little child who wasn't in on the secret said, "Oh, look, the emperor's naked." That was an epiphany. It penetrated right down to the reality of the situation. I think that's the reason why we might continue recognizing Epiphany as a date and as a process that leads us all to those insights and glimpses of ultimate reality in our lives. I am challenged and inspired by these words adapted from Edward Erickson. We stand with eyes toward the east, awaiting the rising of the star. We pray that love shall become flesh and dwell among us, and that compassion shall be born in human hearts. We celebrate the discovery of fact in the garment of legend. Let every cradle be visited by the three good kings of faith, hope, and love. Then Epiphany is with us always, and every birth is the birth of God among us, and every child is the Christ child, and every song is the song of angels. To celebrate Epiphany is to attest to the power of love, to remake humankind. May we be renewed in the love which can save the world. The reason why there is a Christmas, and therefore Epiphany, is to say that Jesus' birth was special because his life was special. Not that his life was special because of his birth. We celebrate Christmas and Epiphany as Unitarian Universalists because of the life he lived and the message he preached. And because of the impact he had was so special, so powerful, and so affirming for us too. The reason why we 21st century liberals, many of whom proclaim not to be Christians, not even liberal Christians, the reason why we can and do celebrate all of Christmas and Epiphany is because of the importance of Jesus' message to our 21st century lives. Jesus' message that love can overcome fear, that people together are stronger than we are separately, and that the way to overcome the alienation, loneliness, and isolation that so pervades our 21st century lives is in community, by being a neighbor to one another. That was Jesus' message 20 centuries ago, and incredibly, that is the message of hope we still need to hear today. And thinking and singing about it all, Bethlehem, the star, the Magi, and all the rest, is the perfect reminder of that message. It takes a village, a little unassuming village, where hopes and fears meet in the wonder of community. May it also be so for us today and always.